Welcome to another episode of the Caged Vision podcast with Carrie Rome and
Lisa Beck.
And we started a new series. Last week we talked about mullets, right?
We did, and Bon Jovi.
And Bon Jovi, and hopefully we didn't offend Bon Jovi. I think
anyone with a mullet.
Well, I don't really care about that. But, I think, when you're as cool as Bon Jovi, because he's a cool guy.
He is a cool guy.
You can look back at that mullet and say, you know what? I wouldn't do it again, but I wore it well.
He rocked the mullet.
A little different from Billy Ray Cyrus.
Billy Ray Cyrus.
I like Jimmy Ray. We should be renaming
his
him
name
Jimmy Ray.
Should be.
Yeah. Anyway, a little bit different because that was just like that was a bad version, right?
Mullet.
But Bon Jovi, right? The point there was you're halfway there in the year, or a little past now, and what are you doing? It's time for self-reflection. Where are we going? Have I made it clear enough for my team? How do we get there? And so this week, we're picking back up on that theme because it's a series on getting your team on go. Right? That's what we're calling it, right, Lisa?
Yeah, getting your team to go.
Getting your team to go. Mm-hmm. She always says things better than I do. So, this week, we're talking about what, Lisa?
Why should I care if my employees don't get it?
Yeah.
Which that whole title, tell me a little bit, because Carrie typically comes up with the titles for what we do, and then I develop outlines and such. But tell me why should I care if my employees don't get it? Where did that title come from?
There's a book called Answer the Question.
Okay.
Right? And it's and it says the people that you are talking to have questions. And so it was what is a question that they may not be saying that maybe I've said in the past that as a business leader you start to feel, but you really won't tell anybody. So it's a question that needs answering, but it's not spoken.
So as the person responsible for answering those questions, part of your job is to go through in your head the process of what are they thinking, what questions do they have, and then answer those questions, so the unnamed questions.
Yeah, I mean, you're a business leader. You feel isolated. You feel on an island. You don't feel like you can really ask many people. And when people, the thing is that when your team when they're not clicking, when they're not working on the right things, you, instead of sort of a self-reflection and say, how do I do this better for them? The tendency is to say, do they even care? Am I the only one that care?
Right, because they're not doing what you think they should be doing because you didn't ask or haven't communicated effectively with them, and they don't know what to do.
Right, but when you're in that moment of pity, the self-talk doesn't go. We don't start out with saying, it's my fault. Ultimately, as a business leader, you're responsible for the outcomes that you want. We all know that, right? But when you start to get things, and when things aren't moving the way that you want, you don't often start out saying, I wonder what I did wrong. You start with, do they even care? And so, in this mid-season of the year, 2018, I thought it was appropriate to say, we're probably meeting some people where they are right now, some business leaders that are they haven't said it out loud, but they've probably said in the back of their head, do they even care? Or am I the only one that cares, which only makes you feel further isolated, further, detached from the group. And then a lot of business leaders have groups that they go and talk to other business leaders about. And so in that group, if you're sort of group sharing about no one cares, that's not helping the cause. No. Right? So our goal is to go through and sort of break this down. If you've thought this ever, or if you've thought this now, here's a few things that you can consider on getting the team back on track, right? Getting them to go.
Well, and I think that two of the things we're going to focus on today are the curse of knowledge.
Yes.
And basic needs.
And we'll have to break both of those down because a lot of business leaders like to go fast. and I like to go fast. I like to really, really go fast. And
Yes,
I like
you
to
do.
consume a lot of information, and I drip the pieces of information. And at some point, from all the different sources and the work that we do, dots start to line up and they start to connect for me. The problem is not everybody else has been on that journey with me, and I have to communicate that to someone who's really operating in the dark because they've been running the business, right?
So let's talk a little bit about the curse of knowledge. I love, love, love the concept of the curse of knowledge because I feel like it is applicable and it is a lot of the reason why things don't get done in a business. So it's the basic. Once we've learned something, there's a quote. Chip and Dan Heath wrote, and they said, once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it was like not to know it.
Yes.
So as a business leader, you know what you want your team to do, and you know what they should be doing. You've done the research. You've got everything. Your team doesn't know what they don't know.
No, and there was a study that I think it was, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but the concept will come through, right? There was a study with kids, and they replaced the crayon box, a box of crayons with candy in it. And so the kid that knew that the candy had been replaced with the crayons had been replaced with candy could never understand why someone did not know that there weren't crayons in there. They would just think, well, because I know that there's candy in there. Everyone else should know. At some point, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, I don't know what age, we start to become self-aware. But then we grow up and somehow we lose that, which is what we're talking about, the curse of knowledge.
There's another study that they did in 1990, and they took two groups of people, and this so illustrates the curse of knowledge. They had tappers and listeners. And so the tappers chose like a basic song like Happy Birthday or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and they were supposed to tap out the rhythm with their knuckles, and then the listeners had to guess what song the tappers were doing. Well, then they asked the tappers, okay, so what percentage of, you've done this, how well have you done this, that you think that the listeners will be able to guess what song you're doing? And the tappers were like, oh, this is so easy, like 50% are going to get it right. Well, in reality, 2.5%, 2.5, less than 5%, wow. 2.5% of the listeners guessed it correctly. Wow. Because they knew the tappers had that knowledge and the listeners did not. I think that's a great illustration of the curse of knowledge. That
is fabulous because if you're like me and you lack some of the rhythm skills, what's in your head, the song that plays in your head, and then how you translate that is very different. Well, when you do that with where you want to go and how you want to grow in the future, when you translate that to your team, the same thing happens, right? It just does.
Yeah. And so a couple of things that you can do, because I want to wrap up because I want to get to basic needs, the second thing. But the couple of things that you can do for curse of knowledge is, I think it's important to always get to the lowest common denominator, a clear message.
And the struggle with that is
that we tend to use language that is large, for lack of a better term.
And we get proud of that large language,
and we get really proud of that.
And we feel like we're dumbing it down at a level that doesn't really support all of the hard work that went in to coming up with the idea.
And I think that it is harder to state things simply.
It's very hard.
I think it takes a lot of time and effort to reduce a message down to its simplest form.
We work hard on that internally. We really, really do.
Yes, we do. And we fail. We have the curse of knowledge,
yeah, we all
too.
do. We all do. It's like when you become a student. I mean, if you're a business owner, you may have advisors, you may use consultants, you may listen to podcasts, you may read newsletters, you may have business books. All of those are sources of information. And what you want to avoid is that unrelatable professor that you had in college that just no one could even, you needed a translator. Don't be that person, right? Because there's no value. You can't get anything out of that.
Well, and I think another way to do that is, as the team lead or the business owner or executive, you have to help your team think critically.
Oh, yes. Yes. So how do we do that?
I think you do it with how questions, So if you are making sure that they understand your message and what you want them to achieve, a lot of times they'll just nod their head and go, yeah, I got it. I got this. But to go a step further and go, so how are you going to make this happen?
Yes. And when we do this in workshops and workshop settings with companies, we actually ask a tremendous amount of how questions. And it's not a way where you're challenging someone. You're not challenging the initial thought process. You're helping them think through all of the steps. Instead of saying, okay, Lisa, how are you going to get that done? And Lisa says, well, I'm going to do this. Great. Let me know how it goes. Instead of just pushing them off, because remember, you felt like you were on an island. The last thing that you want to do is make them feel like they're on an island. So simply just ask the question, okay, Lisa, how are you going to get that done? What do you think that you're going to need in order to get that done? And then as you'll find, the more you ask how, the more they'll have to think through each step in the process. And at some point they'll say, hey, I didn't think of that. Then in our settings, we start to foster that collaboration, and other team members say, well, that sort of touches my area. I don't know how. And you start to uncover the obstacles that you may run into, but you're thinking through them ahead of time, which is fabulous.
And then the whole team sort of helps to condense, consolidate, and get a manageable message and a plan that everybody can.
And that helps with the realistic timelines. It helps uncover the resources that may be required. It helps the person that's responsible, the accountable project owner, feel more secure in their promise to you, which is going to help you achieve your goal, which is going to help you achieve your one big objective for the year. All this stuff ties together. And best of all, the more that you know, the more you ask that how question, the more you'll be able to measure along the way and get your progress updates to know whether or not you're on track.
Yes, and.
Oh, very good. Yes, and.
Yes, and. Yes, and in doing that, you also uncover those employees that perhaps have issues with what's going down. And that,
I think this is a segue.
Are you segueing? I am segueing.
Yes.
What do you think? Did I segue okay?
You segued very, very
transitional
nicely.
statements.
Yes. Very good.
Yes.
So what she's talking about, Lisa's talking about, is basic needs. So if you're sort of scratching your head and saying, what is this podcast about? And why are we talking about basic needs now? Your employees come to work for one thing: to take care of their most basic needs, which is food and shelter. They make money to take care of their most basic needs. So you're probably like, okay, the rocket science hasn't started yet, right? This is not, that's a assumed concept, right? But when you lay out something that they don't understand, something new, what you may experience, if it's not laid out clearly, if your path to growth is not clear, what you may find are two things, and we call them fight or flight. And fight is that person, you're probably all nodding right now, you know the fight one, right? You know the fight. That is the person that became immediately argumentative, and you don't know why. But you feel like you're starting to make progress, and you keep working through that because you feel like, well, we're gonna work through this. There's a little bit of hostility here, but we're gonna work through this. And so you do that openly in front of the team. Make some people a little uncomfortable. What that person is experiencing is they're fighting for that most basic need. Because they say, hey, listen, you're changing something. I don't feel comfortable with it yet, and I'm going to stand up and say it out loud, right? And that frustrates you as a leader. And you're going to work through it because they're stating it openly.
I kind of like those kind of people.
You should like those people, right? We're telling you now, like those people. Here's why. The alternative is flight. And that is when you get the nod and you assume that everyone understands. And the nod's followed by arms crossed and silence. And the rest of the meeting, they say nothing. And when they leave,
they do nothing.
They do nothing. In fact, they do worse than nothing.
They undermine.
It would be bad if they did nothing. But what they do is they're scared, and so they go back and they hoard their day job because they're afraid they're going to lose it. And when they hoard their day job, they don't share any information with anyone because they're afraid they're going to lose it. You cannot move an organization forward if everybody's hoarding information and they're scared. So that is why we put such emphasis on this creating a clear path to growth, which is why people actually hire us to come and do a workshop, because they understand that, hey, I work with this team and I'm self-aware enough to know that I may have a curse of knowledge. And now, after listening to this podcast, I'm self-aware enough to know that some people might fight me, and I might need a person to help me through that.
A translator.
A mediator, if you will. And I need some people to help me spot those that might be in flight.
Because I think there are things that you can do with both of those instances, both the fight and the flight sort of characteristics, personalities. Yeah. And, again, you can ask questions, especially I think it's almost more important to ask questions of the person who sits there and nods their heads and says yes.
Yes.
Things like, help me understand what you just heard.
Yes.
So are you talking to your team with the curse of knowledge in such a way that they take away something entirely different from what you meant to say? And then you can work through that, again, to get to the lowest common denominator, the clear message. Or why did you, for a fight person, why did what you hear cause that reaction? What made you respond that way? What phrase or sentence? What did you hear?
Yeah. Unpack it, right? And so we've gone into a whole lot more of psychology, and we're starting into that. So you may be noticing a little bit more of a serious tone to the podcast. We're not trying to be serious, but we understand that creating a clear path to growth is serious business. If you're a business leader, you're shouldering the responsibility, and you've got a lot to get accomplished. We come in and help companies and do workshops with them or for them. We also teach people our system, the one that we've developed that we're calling, Lisa named brilliantly.
Oh, thank you. I think we did this together.
Well, yes, we did. But
with a little help from Latin class.
Yeah, so we named what we called it. I wanted to call it Go Guide or something. Yes, but Lisa's like, no. I want to call it.
I liked
Grow Guide or Go. Anyway,
you want to call it a Grow Guide or something. Anyway, it's called Addicts, which in Latin means Go Guide, which is really what we do. Is we help your team get to go.
Yes. And we've got a system and a process that you follow. We can teach you how to do it. We can work with your team. We can unpack it all for you. So if you want encouragement and confidence in building your business, keep listening. We've got self-study. Go to our website. You can click on Addicts. We've got a self-study. You can access that. We've got training. You can get the download of the simple one-page system that we use. You can also come to a workshop and say, hey, teach me how to do this for my team, right? Train the trainer concept. Or you could say, you know what? I don't have a day to be trained. Just come do this for me because I understand how critical this is. So thank you for listening. More to come next week.